Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. As Commissioner and Chair of the Audit Committee, it's my pleasure to present the Canadian Dairy Commission's financial results for the 2019-2020 dairy year, ending July 31st of 2020. Before I begin, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the entire team at the Canadian Dairy Commission for their continued professionalism, hard work, always ensuring that we exceed our obligations for sound governance, financial standards, and risk management. So my presentation this afternoon is going to be a summary of the highlights of our financial statements, but please note that our year-end financial statements, as well as quarterly financial statements and annual report, can be found on our website, CDC-CCL.gc.ca. And I'd encourage any participants here today who are interested in greater detail regarding our financials, our activities, and our operations to find these documents, which are publicly available. And you can also find archived documents from past dairy years. The Office of the Auditor General has audited and provided a clean opinion of our financial statements, and our annual report was tabled in Parliament on November 26th of 2020. Slide, please. So I'm going to open my financial review with the CDC's 2019-2020 inventories, which were comprised both of butter stocks and Plan C cheese. I'll remind you that we depleted our remaining inventories of skim milk powder through domestic sales in the 2018-2019 year. We purchase and sell butter through domestic seasonality programs to regulate the supply of dairy products in the domestic market through the course of the year. We manage this butter through our Plan A and Plan B programs. Plan A, you'll recall, is butter that is purchased in bulk and resold to processors when domestic seasonal demand increases, while Plan B butter is purchased from processors, who in turn must repurchase it within a predetermined period. The Canadian Dairy Commission also imports 3,274 tons of butter as a part of Canada's commitments under the WTO Agreement on Agriculture. These products are purchased by the CDC at prevailing world prices, and they're mostly directed to the further processing industry through butter manufacturers. Slide, please. Also a part of our operational inventory in 2020 is Plan C cheese. This program is a part of the dairy industry's response to market disruptions that were caused by the pandemic. The Canadian Milk Supply Management Committee created this storage program as a temporary measure to help the dairy industry deal with the surplus milk. Now, the program consists of a repurchase agreement to initially purchase cheese from a processor up to an agreed quantity at a pre-established price, and also temporarily storing the product for a set period, after which time the processor is contractually obligated to repurchase the product at the same price. A note of interest for any participants who intend to review our financials online, that there's a bit of a particularity with how the Plan C cheese program is reported in our financial statements as compared to butter stocks. Even though we're the owner of the cheese, the accounting standards that we're compelled to apply in our financial statements does not recognize this cheese as inventory, but rather as a financial asset. So similar to an interest-free loan. For this reason, Plan C cheese is presented separately from inventory on the statement of financial position, but you can find it reported there as Plan C repurchase agreements. Nevertheless, we regard Plan C cheese as inventory from an operational standpoint. Slide, please. So we see here on this slide the volume and value of butter and Plan C inventory at year end as compared to the previous dairy year. On the left, you'll see that as at July 31st, 2020, the CDC had 16,075 tons of butter, which represents a decrease of 5,608 tons as compared to the previous year. Now, there's a clear explanation for this decrease. It's primarily from measures that were taken at the beginning of the year to reduce production, which were in effect at the outset of our dairy year, and butter stocks were slowly returning to normal levels. The corresponding dollar value of butter inventory at year end was $132.3 million as compared to $178.2 million the previous year. The Plan C cheese program was launched towards the end of the dairy year, and the CDC purchased 1,049 tons of cheese under this program in 2019-2020, and a dollar value for the Plan C cheese of $9.4 million as at year end. Slide, please. So this slide details our domestic activities, which are the purchases and sales of butter to balance supply on the domestic market, as I mentioned earlier. In the 2019-2020 dairy year, total revenues from domestic sales decreased by $63.3 million or 18% as compared to the previous year. This change is mainly explained by a decrease in butter sales, which corresponds to the reduced inventories that we just went over, as well as to the absence of skim milk powder sales in the 2019-2020 dairy year. The loss that we see here of $2.3 million incurred in the domestic seasonality program represents the financing and transport and carrying charges that are associated with operating these programs. In previous years, this would have been offset by profits from sales of skim milk powder and import butter. These expenses, however, they're recovered from the marketplace as well as from producers as a part of the funding from milk pools, which we'll see in upcoming slides under other income. So this loss has no effective impact on CDC's bottom line. Slide, please. We've included this slide for comparative purposes as there were no export activities this year, compared to a relatively small amount of export butter that was sold last year. Furthermore, in keeping with Canada's trade commitments, the CDC will no longer export in the future to respect the WTO Nairobi decision, which came into effect as of January 1st of 2021. Slide, please. Okay, so we already looked at revenues generated from domestic activities, and this slide details the balance of our other income. So the funding from milk pools represents the largest proportion of other income and amounted to $10.2 million. These are the revenues that are obtained from producers and the marketplace to finance the annual cost of production study, carrying charges associated with Plan A and Plan B butter, the Plan C cheese program expenses, any recoverable industry committee expenses, as well as a portion of the CDC's administrative expenses. Funding from the Government of Canada amounted to $3.9 million. These are parliamentary appropriations that are used to fund a portion of the CDC's administrative expenses. Professional services is our final other income source, and it includes our audit services. These are revenues that we obtained for audit services that relate to milk plant utilization audits, which are performed by the CDC in 6 provinces on a cost recovery basis. This would also include administrative services, which represents our compensation obtained from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada for the CDC to administer the Dairy Direct Payment Program. Slide, please. We have on this slide the CDC's operating and administrative expenses for the year ending July 31st of 2020. Our operating expenses totaling $9.6 million were composed of industry initiatives, the annual cost of production study, Plan C program costs, storage and financing costs, as well as other operating charges. The administrative expenses totaled $8.3 million, and they're composed primarily of salaries and employee benefits, with the balance consisting of expenses related to rent, travel, and administrative support. Slide, please. So this brings us to our overall results and operational surplus for the year ended July 31st of 2020. Domestic seasonality program activities generated a surplus of $1.3 million. Since milk producers are responsible for financing these programs, this amount was redistributed to the provincial marketing boards and agencies. And after taking into account the payment of this operational surplus, the CDC is left with a total comprehensive loss of $7 million at the end of the year. This loss is budgeted, however. The CDC continues to use its retained earnings to fund initiatives that benefit the industry as a whole, such as research, the Matching Investment Fund, and the Workforce Development Initiative. Retained earnings are governed by policies that clearly identify which activities we can finance using these funds, and the CDC board is responsible for applying these policies to approve any new initiative that might be funded by retained earnings. The overall loss of $7 million lowered retained earnings of the previous year to $19.2 million. And this concludes my review of the CDC's key financial elements. I really hope I didn't go too quickly through the slides. I have a bad habit of kicking into my East Coast super fast speaking mode. Pandemic has brought on some bad habits, I'm afraid. I thank you all for taking the time out of your busy day to join us today, and I invite you to share any questions that you might have regarding the financials during question period. Thank you.